The day I buried my mother, I learned the dead can be robbed. The soil was still fresh on her casket when the vultures started circling, and by nightfall, my family had stolen more than just her memory. They'd stolen my future. They stood on one side of her grave, my stepfather with fake tears in his eyes, while his other hand was already deep in the pockets of the woman he swore to love. They thought grief would make me weak. They saw a daughter shattered by loss and just assumed I'd break, that I'd crumble. They were wrong. My grief didn't break me. It turned me into a weapon. It hollowed me out and filled the empty spaces with a cold, clear purpose. This isn't a story about sadness. This is the story of how I used the law not to get rich, but to get even. The funeral was a performance. My stepfather, Mark, played the grieving widower with unnerving perfection. He clutched a handkerchief, his shoulders shaking with fake sobs, accepting condolences from people who only saw a heartbroken man. I saw a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. My younger siblings, Daniel and Chloe, stood beside him, their faces blank and rehearsed. There was a cold wall in their eyes I'd never seen before. They wouldn't meet my gaze. That should have been my first clue. My mother, Eleanor, was my everything. In a family that always felt like mismatched parts, she was the glue. She was the one who saw me, who understood my quiet nature wasn't weakness but observation. She was my only real ally. Mark had entered our lives a decade ago, a whirlwind of charm and promises that swept my mother off her feet. I was a dutiful daughter, a fixer, so I smiled and welcomed him, even as a quiet alarm bell chimed in the back of my mind. 2 days after we laid her to rest, we were summoned to a lawyer's office I'd never seen before. Not my mother's longtime estate planner, but a man named Mr. Davies, whose office smelled of stale coffee and ambition. He sat behind a huge mahogany desk, his face blank as he opened a thick envelope. The reading of the will was short and brutal. The house my mother had inherited from her parents, the house I grew up in, went to Mark. Her life savings, her investments, her jewelry, all of it to Mark. My siblings and I were left a token $5,000 each, a pittance meant to add insult to injury. The will ended with a line that felt like a slap. For their understanding in my decision to provide for my loving husband. The air left my lungs. I looked at Daniel and Chloe, expecting to see the same shock, the same outrage. Instead, nothing. Just a flicker of discomfort before their faces hardened. Mom knew what she was doing, Chloe mumbled, staring at her hands. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. Mark was there for her, he deserves it. As we were leaving, I saw Mark place a hand on Daniel's shoulder. He leaned in and whispered, so low he thought I couldn't hear, "Just stick to the story. It'll all be over soon." The story? What story? My mind was reeling. Back in the lawyer's office, my eyes had snagged on one detail in the will, a name that felt like a splinter under my nail. The document was witnessed by 2 people. One was Mark's golfing buddy. The other was a name I'd never heard in my life, Arthur Finch. In that moment, surrounded by the cold shoulders of my own family, I knew this wasn't a loss. This was a heist. The next few days were a blur of suffocating grief, now tangled with the sharp thorns of betrayal. I was adrift in my own apartment, a space filled with ghosts. Her picture on my desk, her favorite teacup on my shelf. Every object was a memory, and every memory was now tainted. How could she do this? The question echoed in the silence. I called Daniel first. His voice was cold. "Eleanor, just stop. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Mom made her choice." "It wasn't her choice," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "This isn't her, you know it isn't." "What I know," he said, his tone sharp, "is that you always thought you were smarter than everyone else. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're just being greedy." Greedy, the word hung in the air after he hung up. I tried Chloe next. Her response was worse, laced with a chilling, rehearsed pity. "I'm worried about you, Elle," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're not thinking clearly. Grief can make people unstable. You're becoming obsessed. Mark said you might react this way." They were gaslighting me. My own siblings were painting me as a hysterical, greedy daughter. They were closing ranks around Mark, leaving me on the outside. I was an orphan twice over, first by death, then by choice. That night I hit rock bottom. I sat on my floor, surrounded by legal pads, my mind a whirlwind of doubt. Was I wrong? Had I made up my entire relationship with my mother? Desperate for a piece of her, the mother I thought I knew, I scrolled through my phone and found it, an old voicemail from a few months before she died. I pressed play, and her voice, weak and raspy, filled the room. "Eleanor, darling," she rasped. "I'm sorry to bother you. I need you to promise me something." There was a pause, a ragged breath. "Promise me you'll protect what matters. You know what I mean. Protect our legacy. Promise me." Her voice shattered my doubt. It was a lifeline from the past. Protect what matters. She wasn't talking about a vase or a painting. She was talking about her life's work, our family's history, the truth. She knew something was wrong. She was counting on me. In that instant, my grief didn't vanish. It transformed. It cooled, hardened, and crystallized. The despair receded, and in its place, a cold, diamond-hard resolve settled in my chest. The tears stopped. My hands stopped shaking. I stood up, walked to my desk, and turned on my computer. They thought I was just a grieving daughter. They were about to meet the lawyer. I wasn't going to mourn. I was going to fight. My apartment turned into a war room. Timelines, financial charts, and evidence maps took over the walls. Sleep didn't matter. I had a case to build and a predator to bring down. I started with the will itself. As a lawyer, I know a document tells a story. You just have to know how to read it. I got a high-res scan, and under magnification, the signature was an obvious forgery. It was too smooth. My mother's handwriting in her final months was hesitant and spidery. This was a fluid, arrogant imitation. It was Mark's handwriting, barely altered. That was piece number one. Next, the money. If Mark forged a will, he was desperate. I subpoenaed my mother's bank statements and Mark's credit card records. The story they told was damning. Mark, the successful businessman, was buried in gambling debts. He'd been siphoning funds from my mother's accounts for months, small transfers at first, then larger withdrawals, all moved to offshore accounts. He was bleeding her dry. With motive and financial crimes established, I went back to the mysterious witness, Arthur Finch. I ran his name through every database I could think of. Nothing. No driver's license, no credit history, no social security number. Arthur Finch was a ghost, a complete fabrication. A forged will needs two witnesses. In his arrogance, Mark had just invented one. A fatal mistake. The signature was fake. The witness was a ghost. But what I didn't know yet was how deep the deception really went. I needed to know why my family had betrayed me. My thoughts turned to my mother's estranged sister, Aunt Carol. They'd had a massive falling out years ago. I found her living a quiet life 2 states away. When I called and told her what Mark had done, the dam of her silence broke. The betrayal wasn't about money. It was about Mark. He and Carol had been having an affair. My mother found out and cut her sister out of her life completely. Carol, consumed by guilt, proved Mark was capable of any betrayal to get what he wanted. My biggest break, though, came from a calculated risk. Mark was selling my mother's house and gave me one last chance to get my things. In the study, while he was on the phone, I tripped, knocking over the heavy fireplace screen. As I knelt to pick it up, my fingers brushed the ash trap lever. On a hunch, I pulled it. Tucked inside was a plastic grocery bag full of shredded paper. For the next 72 hours, I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, painstakingly reassembling thousands of paper strips. Slowly, a document emerged. My mother's real will, drafted by her longtime lawyer just 6 months before she died. In it, her estate was divided equally among her 3 children. And the house was left to me. Holding it, I felt my mother's presence. Protect what matters. Just as I was fitting the last pieces together, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Eleanor," a hesitant voice asked. "It's Leo, my cousin, the family black sheep exiled years ago after Mark accused him of stealing. I heard what Mark and the others are doing," he said. "He did the same thing to me." He said Mark had framed him after he'd overheard Mark pressuring my mother for money. Leo was a threat, so he was removed. "I have something for you," he said. An hour later, an audio file landed in my email. My blood ran cold as Mark's voice, a low, menacing snarl, filled the room. "You will sign the new will, Eleanor," he said. "Or I swear to God, I will tell Daniel the truth. I will detonate a bomb in the middle of his perfect life, and you and I both know he will never look at you the same way again." The secret, the leverage, what was it? I remembered a strange comment my mother once made, that Daniel was a gift but a complicated one. On my last trip to the house, I'd taken a few things from the bathroom, including a hairbrush Daniel had left there. Now I knew why. I sent a sample of his hair and one of my own to a private DNA lab. I thought the will was the key, but the real weapon was hidden in Daniel's DNA. Mark thought he had built an impenetrable fortress of lies. He controlled my family, he had the money, and he thought my grief had neutralized me. He forgot one thing: I'm a lawyer. And I had just found the evidence to tear that fortress down, brick by brick. If you believe justice is worth fighting for, no matter the cost, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The day I filed the lawsuit, the Cold War turned hot. Mark's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss, and more insultingly, to have me declared mentally unfit, using affidavits from Daniel and Chloe about my erratic behavior. They were painting me as the villain, so I took the fight public. I gave the audio of Mark threatening my mother to a local journalist. The headline broke 2 days later: "Local philanthropist accused of coercing dying wife." His public image began to crack. The courtroom was a tense theater. Mark sat at the opposing table, smug. My siblings sat behind him, a united front of betrayal. They wouldn't look at me. I didn't care. I was looking at the judge. My first witness was Aunt Carol. She walked to the stand, pale but resolute, and told the story of her affair with Mark. His lawyer objected furiously, but the judge overruled him. Mark's mask of the loving husband was ripped away. Next, a handwriting expert calmly presented his analysis, comparing my mother's real signature to the forgery. "The signature on the contested will is a simulation," he stated coolly, "and it shares numerous characteristics with the known handwriting of Mr. Mark Stevens." Then it was time. The plaintiff calls Mark Stevens to the stand. He swaggered to the witness box. This was his end. "Mr. Stevens," I began, "you stated that Arthur Finch, a witness to this will, was a dear old family friend, correct?" "Yes, a wonderful man." "That's fascinating, because according to every government and public database in this country, Arthur Finch has never existed. So I ask you again, who is he?" Mark's smile faltered. "That's impossible. He's a private man." "So private he's a ghost?" I let the question hang. Then I nodded to the clerk. "Your Honor, I'd like to play an audio recording." The courtroom filled with Mark's menacing snarl. "You will sign the new will, Eleanor, or I swear to God, I will tell Daniel the truth." A gasp went through the room. I looked at my siblings. Chloe's face was ashen. Daniel was staring at Mark, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning horror. Mark was sputtering. "That's doctored, it's fake." I walked toward him. "You blackmailed a dying woman with her son's truth. That's not just cruel, it's criminal." I turned to Daniel, whose eyes were locked on mine. "So, are you going to tell the court what you held over my mother's head, Mr. Stevens? Or do I have to?" That was it, the final blow. Mark broke. He surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You witch," he screamed. "You couldn't leave it alone, we had it all." He started ranting, a torrent of self-incriminating madness, admitting to the debts, the forgery, the lies. It was a full confession, born of pure rage, echoing through the stunned courtroom. The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. He declared Mark's will a brazen and despicable act of fraud, and accepted the shredded document as my mother's true will. He immediately referred the case to the district attorney's office. Before he even left the courthouse, Mark Stevens was arrested for forgery, perjury, and felony elder fraud. The grieving widower was led away in handcuffs. The fallout for my siblings was devastating. Chloe, exposed for her perjury, became a social pariah. Daniel was the most tragic casualty. The revelation of his parentage in a bitter court battle shattered him. Our family wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. The inheritance was finally restored, but it was never about the money. I kept my promise. I refused my portion of the estate and worked with my mother's original lawyer to establish the Eleanor Foundation, a trust providing legal aid to women escaping financial abuse. Her legacy would be a sanctuary. Days later, Mark, out on bail, confronted me outside my office. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic desperation. I looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast, cold emptiness. You taught me how to be cold and calculating, I said, my voice steady. You taught me to look for weakness and exploit it, but you never taught me how to lose. A few weeks later, I stood in my mother's empty house one last time. The sale was closing the next day, the proceeds destined for the foundation. Justice had been served. The guilty were punished. The truth was out, but the cost was immeasurable. I had won the war, but the battlefield was my own life, and the casualties were my family. I had my mother's legacy, but I was utterly alone in it. I had fought to protect what mattered, but in the end, I had to destroy my family to save it. In stripping away the lies, I had stripped away everything. They called me greedy. They called me unstable, but I was only ever loyal to the dead. I didn't just bury my mother that day. I buried the version of me who believed family meant protection.